Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the world around you has quietly shifted. Laws feel less fair. Truth feels harder to find. The people in power seem more concerned with keeping it than serving those who gave it to them. You look back and try to pinpoint when it happened, but there's no single moment, only a slow erosion, like a coastline wearing away under a relentless tide. That's how tyranny often takes root, not with the bang, but with the whisper. And that's where Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny begins its urgent conversation with us. Snyder isn't just a historian. He's someone who has spent years studying how democratic societies fall apart and how authoritarian regimes take their place. He wrote On Tyranny as a guide for citizens, a kind of survival manual for freedom. He drew lessons from some of history's darkest chapters, especially the 20th century, when democracies across Europe crumbled and dictators rose from their ruins. He's not writing from a place of abstract theory. He's writing from the vantage point of someone who has seen the patterns, who knows how fragile liberty can be, and who believes we have a choice, but only if we act early. The heart of On Tyranny is both simple and terrifying. Authoritarianism doesn't arrive fully formed. It grows in the cracks of our complacency. It thrives when we tell ourselves it can't happen here. And it is stopped not by grand gestures, but by small, deliberate acts of courage, repeated every day by ordinary people. One of the first lessons Snyder shares is this: do not obey in advance. That might sound strange, but history shows that before authoritarian laws are written, people often change their behavior to align with what they believe the powerful want. They censor themselves. They look the other way. They become complicit without being asked. In Nazi Germany, for example, many people adjusted to the regime's expectations before being forced to, which made oppression easier to enforce. Snyder's point is clear. The fight for freedom begins with refusing to surrender your mind. When you feel the subtle pressure to conform to something you know is wrong, resisting in those small moments can stop a much larger wave. That leads naturally into another of his urgent warnings: defend institutions. Democracies depend on structures like courts, the press, and local governments to keep power in check. When those institutions are attacked, whether through lies, political pressure, or outright dismantling, citizens need to step up and protect them. Think of institutions as the immune system of a free society. If you ignore early signs of infection, the illness can spread beyond control. Snyder reminds us of how quickly independent courts in Eastern Europe were undermined in the 1930s, paving the way for authoritarian control. In our own lives, this means supporting trustworthy journalism, voting in local elections, and holding leaders accountable even when it's inconvenient. Another powerful insight from the book is the importance of believing in truth. Tyranny thrives on confusion. When people stop agreeing on basic facts, when they live in separate realities shaped by propaganda or endless spin, they can no longer unite to solve problems or resist abuse. Snyder points to Soviet history, where the constant flood of lies wasn't designed to make people believe one single falsehood. It was meant to exhaust them, to make them doubt everything. Once truth becomes slippery, power can shape reality however it wants. For us, defending truth might mean checking sources before sharing news, calling out misinformation even when it's uncomfortable, and refusing to give up on the idea that facts still matter. Closely tied to this is Snyder's call to stand out. Tyranny feeds on the silence of the crowd. When injustice happens, the majority often stays quiet, not wanting to draw attention to themselves. But that silence can be read as consent. In occupied Europe during World War II, small acts of visible dissent, wearing a forbidden symbol, refusing to salute, reminded people that not everyone accepted the regime's authority. In today's context, standing out might mean speaking up at work when you hear prejudice, attending a protest, or even just making your values visible in how you live. Snyder is blunt. Courage is contagious, but someone has to go first. And then there's the lesson about making eye contact and small talk. At first glance, it seems almost trivial. But Snyder explains that in repressive societies, social trust collapses. Neighbors stop talking, people become isolated, easier to control. Building small human connections, greeting someone on the street, engaging with people outside your usual circles, weaves the social tighter, making it harder for fear and division to spread. It's a quiet form of resistance, one that starts in the everyday moments we often overlook. He also warns us to beware the allure of paramilitaries, groups that claim to protect the public but are loyal only to a leader, not the law. In history, such groups have been the muscle that enforces authoritarian will, from Hitler's brown shirts to more recent militias. Snyder urges citizens to reject the normalization of such forces and to insist that policing remains accountable to the people, not to political agendas. A thread running through all these lessons is the idea that tyranny doesn't always wear a uniform or announce itself with a coup. Sometimes it arrives through gradual erosion, wrapped in language about safety, tradition, or unity. It can be seductive, especially when it offers easy answers to complex problems. That's why Snyder urges us to be wary of one-party states, to resist the temptation of blind nationalism, and to keep our citizenship active rather than passive. He emphasizes the need to set an example for the next generation. In moments of moral testing, young people look to see how adults respond. Do we take the easy path of compliance, or do we choose the harder road of principle? In societies that later felt a tyranny, children often recalled how their parents' silence taught them what was safe to say and what was not. By modeling courage, we not only defend the present, but plant seeds for the future. Snyder's final chapters remind us that no one is too small to make a difference. The 20th century is full of stories where individual acts, hiding a neighbor, smuggling a banned book, or refusing an unlawful order, saved lives or kept hope alive in dark times. He argues that while we can't control the big picture alone, we can control our actions. And when enough people take small, principled stands, they add up to something powerful. Stepping back, the book leaves you with a warning and a hope. The warning is that democracy is never guaranteed. The hope is that its defense is within our reach if we choose to act with awareness and courage. Snyder doesn't ask us to be heroes in grand battles. He asks us to live as citizens, to stay informed, to participate, to look out for one another, and to refuse to give up our freedom piece by piece. So maybe the real question is this: the next time you feel the quiet pull to look away, to say nothing, to let someone else deal with it, what will you do? Snyder leaves no doubt. The health of our democracy, the protection of our rights, and the dignity of our neighbors depend on how each of us answers that question, not someday, but now. If you want to explore these ideas more deeply, if you want to understand the patterns of history that still shape our present, Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny is a book worth reading in full, and perhaps worth reading again, not because it's comforting, but because it's a mirror asking if we're ready to see ourselves clearly and act before it's too late.